keep us honest then. All right. So I'm going to tell you in a minute why we were in Maldives. I put this up here, Maldives, the sunny side of life. That's their marketing slogan, and it's just like Arkansas, the natural state. You know, I mean, that's one of the things there. So people, when we came back from Maldives, everybody says, well, what was it like? You know, and we talked about this, and I'll tell you what I usually say, and I think Rita usually says too, and I'll preface that by saying I have worked a cumulative total of 7 years in developing countries around the world. Rita and I have been together for 25 years and have also done a lot of that. What I tell people is it was the most peaceful, safest place we have ever lived. Rita, as a woman, could go out any time of day or night alone and not fear for personal safety.
And I'll bore you with more of that later on when he's done.
I want, and she will. She won't bore you.
But I have a lot to say about women in that country, so.
But I'll just say that that's all about the people in Maldives. And when you start looking at the people in Maldives, what really shapes them is their faith. And so Maldives is a very unique place. So I've got a sort of a formal little presentation I'm going to go through. Rita will have some comments. I'm going to try to keep it fairly quick because I'd like to open it up for questions and discussion. There's a lot of things I would like to say about Maldives. I'm going to go through a lot. I'm going to hit a lot of stuff quickly. If you could, try to save questions until we're through that, because otherwise there's 50 to 100 different directions we could go on that. So if you don't mind, if there's something you really need some clarity, you know, feel free to raise your hand. So, my name's Jerry Hemd. This is my partner and wife, Brita Reckby. As I mentioned, we've been together for 25 years. We had the good fortune to go.
Not working?
No, let's see.
We did
Here we go.
test it.
All right. We had the good fortune to spend 4 months in Maldives, and we literally left almost a year ago today. It was January 28th when we went there. I received a grant from the Fulbright program, and so the Fulbright Scholar Grant, and so I went to teach in Maldives for a semester. Fulbright, of course, has great Arkansas roots and origins. So I'm a professor emeritus from the University of Wisconsin-Superior. I'm an economist by training, and the last 5 or 10 years of my professional career, I was getting into ecological economics, sustainability, things of that sort. While there, I was a visiting professor at Maldives National University Business School. And Maldives National University is the public university in Maldives. And it was just created in the year 2000, and the economics program I was connected with is the only economics program in the country. And so there's MNU, and it was the main campus is in the capital island and city of Male, and then they have branch campuses. That was a very vibrant institution. I really enjoyed my time there. And just these are my. I'm not doing anything. These are my colleagues from the university. The gentleman on the one side of me is the dean of the business school, and the woman on the other side of me was the department head, so she was suited up, and the other gentleman was Mubarak. And so one of the reasons I've got a couple pictures like this in there, my understanding that I came out of the country with about Maldives was shaped in many ways by the people I interacted with on a daily basis. I should leave that down there.
That's not you.
And so I had daily interactions with folks on campus. I was there 4 days a week. I was teaching in business economics. I was, Does it do that usually, George, or is this
Not
a?
usually, but every once in a while, there's a connection.
Okay, all right.
It's a little loose.
I'll get
Keep
used to it.
talking.
Yeah.
And then I had a smaller class I met with, that I would tutor once a week for a couple of hours. And so they were a window for me to the country and would help explain things. Anytime I had questions, they were always willing to sit down and answer questions. My students were also willing to answer questions. And my favorite anecdote about what I learned from my students, we were looking at, I really got into all the elements of the economy, and I was looking at taxes and sort of the taxes on each and every item. And I was struck by the fact, we started looking at, in an Islamic country, alcohol and pork, of course, are not something that would be readily available. And I made the mistake of saying, oh, how do you deal with things that are illegal, like alcohol and pork? And they said, they are not illegal. They're forbidden. I went, okay.
Sorry,
It's okay.
So you had more females in the econ department than males.
And that was not unusual in the university system. There were, and I found this in other countries too, a lot of the faculty were female. Most of the faculty, just as you brought up, were trained outside the country. They're trying to get to the point where they can train they can award their own masters and PhDs, so they're sort of in the development stage of things. Maybe if I go to a different slide, it'll help.
No, I don't think so.
And I also had a chance to go to the southernmost campus, and this is the
I think it's
faculty
this
there. And again, you'll
HDMI
note that a
connection
lot of
is
the
a little
faculty
loose.
were female at this campus as well. And I just want to say a couple things about this gentleman. The first day I was on campus, they had taken me to a third floor office where I was going to be spending my semester there. And it was really kind of isolated. There was nobody else on the third floor. And this guy, who I had read his PhD dissertation, he did research on sustainability and tourism. I was really looking forward to meeting him. He said, would you be interested in sharing office space with me? And I said, oh, I would love that. And so his name is Ahmed Inaz. Inaz and I became very, very good friends. We talked at length almost every day. He shared his life, his views on Maldives, religion, etc. And so I still talk with him regularly via Zoom. We try to get together about every 2 or 3 weeks and compare notes. And one thing I want to say about Inaz is that in 2008, there was a change in how the government was set up in Maldives, and it really became more of a democratic country. He was the Minister of Finance for that president, President Nasheed. And so he has a window on the economy and to people that I would have never had. He got together periodically with the president of the country, both the past president and the current president. So anytime I couldn't figure something out, I'd say, Inaz, can you explain this to me? And then he would explain it to me. And so just a very, very dear friend. And then finally, the other window that we had, and Rita will probably say more about this group later too, we stayed at a small hotel on one of the islands, and this was the staff at that hotel. I think there were 26 people total that were working there. And they were like family to us the whole time we were there. We got to know them very, very well. Many of the people on the staff were not Maldivian, and that's an interesting part of the Maldivian economy. A lot of them were from Bangladesh, India, etc. But they also were very gracious, very open, and kind of taught us everything that we learned while we were there. So I want to just do a quick couple comments, and I'm going to go through some pictures. I've noted that Maldives is what's sometimes called a climate change frontline state. Maldives is the flattest country on earth. 80% of Maldives is below this level in elevation. 80%. The highest elevation in the country is here. And so when we start talking about climate change and changing sea level, it's not just something that, oh yeah, that's something we should do about. It's an existential question for countries like Maldives. And there are a lot of island nations that are facing that. And so part of what fascinated me about Maldives was what they were going to do and what they have been doing and what they are doing. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that they're on the front line of a problem they did not create. And they're responding to it as best as they can. And you'll see geographically they're very isolated and remote, so they were never a colony. They have their own distinct ethnicity. They have their own language called Dhivehi, and they've been able to maintain that over time. There's sort of an interesting divide coming. There's the capital area and the outlying islands. They are almost completely dependent on international tourism, and it's a very unique type of international tourism. They are an Islamic state. That is a state religion, and you cannot be a citizen of Maldives unless you are Muslim. And then I think, again, partly a reflection of their history and their faith, there's fairly universal provision of housing, education, healthcare, social, religious services. I saw one person begging the entire time I was there. One. And people were well housed, well fed, and then so, well, I could go on and on. So here's where it's located, and this sort of exaggerates perhaps the size of the country, and I'll talk about the size in a minute. So it's in the Indian Ocean, about 500 miles away from the Indian subcontinent and Sri Lanka. And so you can see out here, I mean, it's just all water, Indian Ocean. So fairly isolated. It's been populated, they estimate, since about 15 to 2,000 years BC. So there have been people there a long time. The ethnic mix sort of reflects a little bit of Arabia and India, but it's very distinctive. There are 1,192 islands, coral islands, that make up the country. And they are in this chain of atolls. And so an atoll is just sort of a round-shaped grouping of coral-shaped islands. The length of the country is over 500 miles. The width is about 80 miles, but you can see that only the land area is just 115 square miles of land area. The population of the country right now is about 500,000. So when you think of that population, it's about the size of a small to medium-sized city in the U.S. So that's the national population. 188 of the islands are classified as inhabited, and of those, only 20 have more than 1,000 people on them. And there's another 180 islands that are classified as resorts, and the other islands are uninhabited. And I'll just note, every inhabited island has healthcare, education, etc., provision all across the country. So you look at the pictures, you Google Maldives, and you go, it can't look like this. This has got to be a doctored photo. What we discovered was the photos don't do the place justice. It is naturally beautiful, unbelievable. The colors are just amazing. Speaking of naturally beautiful, right? Well, I like this photo for a variety of reasons, but this shows that watercolor very near the shore with the, all the islands have coral reefs around them. So that the watercolors are just amazing and very, very clear. This is the capital, right off the Capital Island. So, these shots, I mean, it's hard to imagine, and the waters are teeming with coral and all kinds of sea life. I mean, the first time I taught a class there, the word I kept saying to my students, because we'd just gotten back from doing a snorkeling trip and whatever, I said, unbelievable. I mean, I just couldn't believe, and they recognize that. They know the natural bounty they have. So this gives you sort of a sense of what an atoll would look like. Those are all little coral islands. An atoll, evidently by definition, has usually water in the middle. So there's 26 of these strung around in the Indian Ocean, and that makes up the country of Maldives. And we had a chance, we did visit, well, I'll talk about resorts in a minute. So you're flying over, you see all these colors again. This is a seaplane. Brita didn't want me to put the slide in, but I love this slide. For those of you that have been following the whole climate debate for the last, it seems like forever, back in 2008, Maldives really stepped out on the world stage. This is when their government changed. It became very progressive. It was President Nasheed, and he was trying to demonstrate to the world this existential problem that I was talking about. And so this was a cabinet meeting underwater to say, this is where we're headed if you folks don't do something. And it made kind of a splash, if you'll pardon me. And they did make a movie about it. If you want to learn about President Nasheed, it's called Island President, about how he was very much in the lead on pushing policy change related to climate change. So we're going to zero in here. This is the part of the atoll where we live, and the response that Maldives has made to this existential problem. Some countries that are like Maldives or island countries are saving money, and they're negotiating deals with like New Zealand or Australia to buy some land and move their country there. Maldives has decided that they are going to reclaim land or build up islands and find a way to stay where they are. This picture was taken in about 1997. This is the capital. Oops. Oh, this doesn't show up when you read it.
He has a
There's a
point.
There's a pointer.
No,
pointer
no.
right here.
Oh, that's why, because these are the pointer. This is the capital island of Mali. This is the international airport, and this is nothing in 1997. This was taken probably about 2020. This entire island has been reclaimed, and I don't know if you could say reclaimed when it wasn't there beforehand, but it's been built up to about 2 meters elevation, and if it went to the full development, they could house about half of the national population on that island. And that's what they're doing. And so they're also building up around these other islands. And one of the parts of their strategy is they have now put a bridge between the capital island and the island we lived on, Hulumali. And so this is sort of what reclamation looks like. It's not so pretty, you know, and there's a lot of debate about whether the pluses and minuses of reclamation, but they have made a commitment to making space for their population. And so it's basically pumping out. There's a lot of, they're pumping sand in around this island, heavy equipment, and they created their own corporation that does this, and they've gotten very, very good at it. They've been doing it for over a couple of decades, and they essentially just keep building up this island. This was the first part of that development project. This is Hulumali again. This is the capital island in the background. And we were living about right here on Hulumali. When we were going to go there, I asked someone who'd been there before, where should we live? And she said, you're going to want to live in Hulumali because Mali is really crowded. And I was really kind of curious to live in a place, you know, an artificial island, etc. Same thing, that, you know, it's mostly high-rise kinds of apartments. Housing is provided for all the citizens. They've also really gotten into solar. You can see the solar panels on the top of all the buildings. And right now, most of their power is, like many places, it's generators running on petrol. You know, so that's how they're generating power. So they're trying to shift as much as they can to solar. And while we were there, they were building a solar array all along the road between the capital and Hulumali, panels on both sides of the road. Huge, huge project. And the World Bank has been very involved with funding that kind of project. This is the bridge. And so you're thinking, this bridge probably wouldn't be a big deal in the U.S. This is the China-Maldives Friendship Bridge. And the irony of that is, Brita and I were in Myanmar for a half a year in 2015. And we also lived in a place where to get to the main city of Myanmar, we traveled over the China Friendship Bridge. And so if you've ever heard of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, this is part of what it looks like in different parts of the world. So it's a bridge, it's a little less than a mile long, but it connected these two islands. And as I said, we had 500,000 people in Maldives. About 140 to 150,000 people live on this island alone. They think, and this is the airport, and they think that they could put perhaps up to 200, 250,000 on Hulamali. So they could really, literally bring all their population in to those two islands. When that bridge was put in, you used to have to go by ferry from the capital to the next island. You know, there were ferries about every half hour. They're very romantic and whatever. But with this, they brought in high efficiency buses. I commuted to work. We lived on Hulamali. My campus was on Mali. All of the 1,000 taxis that serve Mali and Hulamali are hybrid and electric. And that's a requirement. And just a little side note, all the taxi drivers were Maldivian, which is pretty unusual because they have 1/4 of the 500,000 people in Maldives are foreign workers. It's sort of somewhat like the Middle East in a way. A lot of those foreign workers are doing construction, and those are primarily Bangladeshis. Certain professional things are foreign workers, like pharmacists, primarily from India. Service workers in restaurants, whatever, are from Philippines, India, Bangladesh, etc. And so I'm sort of an economic anthropologist, and it drove Brita crazy, I think. Every time we go to eat somewhere, I'd always say, "Where are you from? And where are you from? And how long have you been here?" And because tourism is so important to Maldives, they were one of the first countries to come out of the pandemic. They really got on the vaccination, etc., within their country, and they were so far ahead of the other tourist countries that people that worked in the tourist sectors elsewhere migrated to Maldives because there were jobs for them to get into. I thought that was really, really interesting. This is Mali. Jam-packed, 140 to 150,000 people. It's considered probably one of the most densely populated cities in the world. It's got very narrow, teeming streets. I knew someone at the university, they had offered him a car as a perk for his job. And he says, "I don't want a car. There's nowhere to park it, and there's no way I'm going to be able to drive around the city if I've got a car."
Can I just interject
Sure.
one thing? So I learned how to part the sea, the traffic sea, when we got to Maldives. Because as you see, it's just moving. And there are no traffic lights, okay? There's no system that we would recognize. For a pedestrian to cross the street, you look straight ahead, your eye is on the prize, which is the other side of the street, and you step off the curb. All of those things you learned as a child, look both ways, wait, blah, blah, all of that flies right out the window. You step in and you don't hesitate and you keep moving. You're clutching. Everything is clutching. You're just clutching. And for a while, I would be gripping him and just terrified that something was going to happen. But then I learned to do it myself. And you just step into the mass and you go. And they move around.
The most dangerous thing you could do would be to react, because they're expecting you to keep moving smoothly across. And this is not unique to Maldives. I learned this when I worked in Hanoi. It was the same thing. Bikes and motorcycles, you just have to
You just go. You just
straight
go.
across. And they are very adept at going around you. But if you start moving like that, then you're going to get hit. So on Hulamali, which is a newly designed, wide streets, they've done a great job of putting a lot of plantings in. It's a planned community in a sense, and so this kind of also helped tip the balance for why we decided to live in Hulamali rather than Mali. So this is the Fulbright program provided a very generous housing and other allowance, so we're not living in a hut or anything. while we're there. So
This is our deck.
This is our deck.
That was a cruise ship.
Now, this is the deck from our apartment.
Whoa. Sorry about that.
Oh, I wanna go there.
Oh, be careful what you say.
Well, how many did I get ahead of?
Oh, you're way. Yeah. Why don't you
And the showings.
end the show and then we'll go back up. Right there. Right there.
Yeah,
While,
so
while I'm
that's our
here,
deck.
I'm going
We had a
Close that.
2-bedroom apartment, 2-bath, kitchen,
Just
living
hit slide
living
show.
area.
There we go.
The top, it was the
think so?
penthouse of the beach hotel
And
that
it
we
didn't
were
have a
in.
problem until you,
With a hot tub,
so maybe.
I just closed
and
my,
a steam
let's see if it
steam
happens.
shower. But every day, you woke up to the
Yep.
sunrise and the water, and it was absolutely glorious.
Woo,
Yeah, it's gone.
it's gone here.
Yeah, but I mean,
Okay.
it's not flashing through.
Let's try not doing it as a slideshow.
All right.
If the
With a- Yeah.
drill still works.
Okay, so we'll try that. Maybe the picture will hang. So this is the view from our deck. And as Bree said, in the hotel, they had never had anyone rent that for 4 months. I mean, they were so afraid we were gonna be awful people. And hang on, you imagine, 4 months with a bad tenant? Well, they decided we were okay and they took very, very good care of us. This was a view of the little park right next to where we stayed. And this was, they called it swimming track. This was the swimming track. And so it's anchored there, it's flotation, so it was so people could go swimming. There were swimming lessons every morning. There would be this, and this was at 6 o'clock, this steady stream in of motorcycles, parents bringing their kids for swimming lessons. And there would be hundreds of children there in the morning taking swimming lessons and kind of connected to the swimming track. And the other nice thing about this was if we were having to take, I'm gonna throw that thing.
I've got do not disturb on it, doesn't seem to be working. Sorry. Let me just.
Okay. This is a challenge, isn't it? Okay. So that was another view. Rita never got tired of taking pictures of this. Every sunset was just beautiful.
Sunrise.
Yeah, I mean, so it goes on and on and on. We had neighborhood markets there. There were, modern shopping malls, etc., in Mali and Hula Mali. But the reason I'm zeroing in on the food is almost everything in Maldives is imported. This is a sweet potato from Egypt. So we used to marvel. We'd go down to buy just our provisions and just to see where, especially the fresh stuff, where it was coming from. Middle East, India, everywhere. Because everything's imported, imports are one way they collect taxes. There's a 20% tax on almost all goods and services, but there's a 40% tax on all goods and services that come in that are used by the tourist sector. And pretty soon we're gonna look at the resorts. The resorts have to pay that extra freight, and that money all goes into the national coffers and helps keep the government and everything else going. So we've looked at Mali and Hula Mali. There are also, this would be what one of the inhabited islands might look like. This would be a pretty typical street scene. There's no bridges connecting them anywhere. There's hardly any vehicles other than bicycles and motorcycles. Who would need a car when the island's like 1 mile by 2 miles? You can just walk across the island. This was one of the islands that we went to a few times when we were doing some snorkeling stuff. Before I go to the resorts, I want to say something about Islam. So I said Maldives is an Islamic state, and Islam has been in Maldives since about 1100. It's hardwired into the culture there. I mean, it's a part and parcel of everything you do. But as you can see here, this was a new study done by the Pew Charitable Trust. 4 out of 10 countries in the world either have state religions or preferred religions. This is not an aberration, not particularly unique. And I've worked in a couple other countries where that's been the case. What does it mean in Maldives? It means that the Ministry of Islamic Affairs is just like a cabinet level office that we would have in our country. There's a Minister of Islamic Affairs, oversees all the mosques. Every inhabited island has a mosque. All schedules are built around times for prayer. There are 5 times for prayer per day, and everything changes. We were also there during Ramadan, which is a month-long period where fasting goes on from sunrise to sunset. No food, no drinks, and this means no water even, no smoking, and no sex. From sunrise to sunset for, depending on the lunar calendar, 28 to 30 days. And so that also, the university completely changed its schedule to compensate for Ramadan. And I'm just going to do an anecdote about my students quick. Is that,
Sure, sure.
so my student, I was walking to my tutorial one day, and like 3 of these young men standing there just going, you know, it was during Ramadan. And they said, oh, we're so tired. You know, we're fasting, it's Ramadan. And I said, yeah? I said, so am I. And I'm the one that has to do all the work in there. You're just sitting there passively. And they went, and that was it, you know.
I think the other thing that I want to say about Islam, or I want you to know about Islam, is this. I found this to be a country of people who were living their faith and finding room for their lives versus living their life and finding room for their faith. You follow me? It was all about their spiritual path, which also made it such a safe place, such a generous place, and such a loving place, and such a place lacking in want, because everybody took care of each other. It was astounding to me, absolutely astounding. And I thought, okay, they're doing it. When is the rest of the world gonna get on the, bandwagon? Because they got it figured out.
And
Yeah.
I'll just add to that. It's not like we became Muslim when we were there, but we came to appreciate it. And my colleague, Inaz, was always willing to talk as long as I wanted about the Muslim faith. And he was gentle about it, he loved it, he lived it. It was so important to everything he was and everything he did. My dean was the same way. He would also sit down and talk with me. So it was really eye-opening for us. So that's the Maldives we experienced. Most people don't experience that part of Maldives. Most people look out the window and go, oh, we're getting ready to land at the international airport in Maldives. And when they land at the airport, remember, international tourism, one of 2 things happens. They walk across the road from the airport and get on a high-speed boat that's taking them to their resort because it's fairly near the airport. Or they make their way by shuttle to the seaplane airport and they get flown to the resort because it's farther away than would be, a comfortable ride by speedboat. And I did just look up today, this is the largest seaplane fleet in the world. They do 100,000 flights per year. And I loved it. We did go to one resort. I love the fact, check out their feet.
Barefoot pilots.
Barefoot pilots, And a lot of the resorts are really,
That's a bummer.
yeah, it is. So, flying to a resort, so now we're getting into what most people see. And this happens to be the resort we went to, and this is not a high-end resort. This is probably in the lower 4th, lower 5th of resorts. Look at that place, these are sort of stock photos of resorts. The resort price ranges usually start around 300 to 500 per night. Then they move pretty quickly to 1 to 2, 3,000. And I was talking with the faculty at the tourism and hospitality management. They were meeting with Hilton folks. Hilton was opening 3 new resorts, $15,000 per night. You know, you can imagine what you get there. Every room has its own infinity pool. The food's there. You have people assigned to the room. I mean, this is very. But there is. Each.
On the resort, there is.
So Maldives has a very, and this is, in a way, it's brilliant. They got into international tourism in 1972, so they've been doing this for 50 years. They have what's called a one island, one resort model for tourism. The island, the only thing on this resort island is the resort. Nothing else. This was an uninhabited island until it got leased to the resort. The resort managers or owners have to provide everything. Power, water, waste management. The whole show is theirs. And then in turn, they can serve alcohol, you can have bacon at breakfast, et cetera, et cetera. They have to also find their own water supply. Maldives has kind of a water issue. I mean, all the water is desalinated, almost all the water. They claim to have the only Coca-Cola plant that makes Coke with desalinated water. The other thing I want to say on the sustainability side, they didn't want high-rise development. So any resort island, no building can be higher than the vegetation. A little bit lower than vegetation. And they also restricted how much of the land area could be developed. Originally it was 20%, now it's moved up to 30%. And so while we think, oh, that is really cool, look at that, they built that all over the water. Well, when they did that, they weren't using up their 20% allotment on the island. And so what was sort of a necessity to get enough lodging, well, it also turned it into something people love. They'll pay a lot just to have a building over the water. So the country's full of these beautiful, beautiful resorts. We didn't stay at any of these, but they were there. We'd see them when we'd go by. You can fly over them. And it is, depending on what estimate you look at, anywhere from 25 to 60% of the economy is driven by the tourism industry, and the tourism industry in Maldives is primarily high-end resorts. So the Beyoncés of the world, when they want to go somewhere where they don't want anyone to know or where they are and to bother them, this is the kind of place they will go. They can come in, they can come out by private plane, no one ever sees them, no one ever bothers them. I mean, the properties are just amazing. I mean, you just look at that color. So, I'm going to finish then with about 15 years ago. So there was a 30-year run where the only international tourism was on these one island, one resort. With this president who did the underwater cabinet meeting, whatever, they opened things up and they said, okay, we will allow guest houses and small hotels on inhabited islands. And that is starting now. And so these are just a couple of pictures of what some of those look like. But I've looked at the usage, and there you're not going to get alcohol. You're not going to get pork. Depending on which island you're on, some of the island councils will not allow people in skimpy bathing suits. So we went to a couple of places where there were signs out where you could not go. They might have a small bikini beach. So it's sort of a different, it's a bit of a conflict with, and that's why I think partly they kept it away from the inhabited islands. And my students, so it's the island we were on, Hulamali, we were starting to see a lot of hotel and restaurant development there. And I asked my students what they thought of it. And my students were sort of all young, 18 to 23, 24 years old. Almost to a person, they were very troubled by the way people dressed and the way they behaved. So that's all I got. Do you want to?
Sure. This was Jerry's colleague and his family, and we did become quite close to them. Just delightful. We're hoping that they will come visit us someday. What a sweetheart. 13 years old. She loved art, which was devoid in the country, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I enjoyed her very much. Our family at the hotel, who truly did become family for us, took care of us, looked out for us. I had a very wicked bout with food poisoning that I got on a different island. They took me to the hospital, they fussed over me, the chef made me special things to eat. We cried when we left. They're just beautiful. Friday is their holy day, and it's the day the family gets dressed and goes out and has a walk on the beach. Aren't they beautiful? The fish market. I love showing people pictures of the fish market. So you had some mashuni tonight, which is right there. That's a typical breakfast dish. Everything is tuna in Maldives. Well, plus, oh, well, never mind. Breakfast is over. Oh. A masala omelet. There's a heavy Indian influence in the food. And kulimas, which is another tuna dish with a little more kick to it. Women walking the beach early in the morning, and this is typically what they would be wearing if they went swimming as well.
What was the temperature?
The temperature usually was about like 82 degrees all the time.
Yeah,
Morning, noon, and night.
It's on the equator, isn't it?
82
yeah, it
degrees.
is. Yeah, the country straddles the
Yeah.
equator, yep.
Wow.
So this is a vault at a very, very old mosque in Mali that was constructed out of coral. And I think the next, I want to show you this picture. The gravestones that come to a peak are male. The ones with the rounded tops are female. The height of the stone, let's go to the next picture. The height of the stone gives you some indication of how old the person was when they died. So the shorter the stone, the shorter the life. All of these are carved out of coral. Oh, have you ever been snorkeling? Oh my gosh, I fell in love with snorkeling. We did go to a resort, and we picked this resort because they had sea turtles. And, you know, from here to the driveway out there, you'd get out into the water, and the seabed would be covered with grass. And these guys, who are, you know, bigger than your tables, are munching away, and you lay there, you know, 4 or 5 feet from them. You lay there for as long as you can watching them. It's just the best high in the world. Okay. Oh, this is a shark. One night we were at another resort, and they lit up the water, and so we got to watch this sea life pass by. International Women's Day coming up in March. So we were there for International Women's Day. And I have a thing about women. I love women and Women's Day, and I have gone to many celebrations in this country, and I'm thinking, oh, International Women's Day. A daughter-in-law is visiting us with a grandchild. The women from downstairs at the desk call, could we come up and see you? Well, sure. So 3 women come up. They have a gift for me and for my daughter-in-law in honor of International Women's Day. It was the sweetest thing. And then an invitation is extended. You're invited to this banquet tonight for International Women's Day. Oh, okay. So me, in my Western cultural hat on, I'm thinking, oh, banquet. Somebody's gonna get up and talk. There's gonna be food. We're gonna hear about women doing marvelous things. You know, yeah, we should go. Woo! I was so off base. So this is a great lesson in expectations or cultural habits or things that are so ingrained in you that you think, well, that's what is going to happen here. So Jerry and I go down to the dining room and we see this, and there is a beautiful buffet set up, but it's karaoke. It's a karaoke event. There's no women speaking. There's nothing, honoring someone's great accomplishments. It's, do you want to sing karaoke? No. I don't want to sing karaoke. But those kinds of things happen more than once, where we would have an expectation about, or an understanding about how something was going to be, and it would be totally different, just totally different. So
Yep, okay.
that's the
That's
joke
it.
to myself.
Questions,
No,
please?
questions.
Yes, sir.
So, can you share with us the results of the Fulbright side of this trip? Like, you went there to do the
Yeah,
economic.
I could talk
Are you
for,
at liberty to share?
sure, I could talk for a long time. I'll give you the real short version.
Yeah.
From the time that I started applying for this and the time I arrived was 2 years. And so what happens is, and this was not my first Fulbright, and so what happens is, on the front end, you think you know what you're going to be doing, and when you arrive there, you end up doing something completely different. And partly that's because the people you work with when you get there are not involved in any of the decisions from here to here. So I ended up teaching something different than I thought I was going to teach, but I did end up mentoring faculty. Because of my age, I'm an elder teacher. I've got something to offer. So I ended up teaching people research methods, how to get published, thesis statement things, administrative stuff for new schools, etc. So I became kind of a go-to guy for those kinds of things, which was awesome. It wasn't really what I thought I was going to be doing.
What did you think you were going to
I thought I was going to be teaching new classes in sustainability. I was going to offer ecological economics and sustainable economics. They didn't need me for that, but I didn't know that till I got there. And so they didn't know what they needed me for until I got there either. And then we figured it out.
Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Question, you mentioned that the highest point of the land in the country is 2 meters above mean sea level.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about tides, so high tide, low tide. The difference between high tide and low tide in some places can be more than 2 meters.
Yeah. What would you say the difference was there? They've done a lot. So like the island we're on, which was reclaimed, they've got lots of barriers and stuff all the way around it to sort of keep it from.
Artificial barriers.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So there's been a lot of technological development and artificial barriers, and all around the Capital Island, the same thing. It is a problem, because you've got that, and imagine if a tsunami hit. They had a tsunami in 2004 that was just devastating, not quite a bit of loss of life, but the infrastructure and the houses and stuff were blown away.
And especially, the reclaimed land is just sand, there's nothing anchoring the
Right,
sand.
right.
So were there barrier reefs around the island? Were there gaps in the barrier reefs?
Well,
for sharks?
there are coral reefs around every island.
Mhm.
I mean, there's coral everywhere. And one of the problems they've had over time is, early on in the resort industry, if you wanted to make it easier for a boat to come in and out of your island, you just go and knock the coral out. And so there were practices in the past that sort of aggravated the problem. Now they're doing a lot of coral building activities, but they're starting to see that that's a pretty important part of what they're doing. I don't know how much the reclamation efforts are damaging coral and other things. I really didn't have the ability to take a look at that.
So do the barrier coral reefs around islands keep out sharks?
Well, actually,
We swam with sharks.
sharks are not a big deal.
Not a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, the first time we were underwater and had a shark come near, it felt like kind of a big deal, but it wasn't. And this, the guy who was taking us out, he said, "Check it out," and he pretty much didn't guarantee we'd see sharks, but we did see sharks. And so really no fish there to fear in terms of harm to your body.
What kind of storms do they have? You mentioned the tsunami years ago, but do they have hurricanes or bad storms? Because it looks so fragile. It looks like a hurricane could just wipe them out.
I mean, they get the usual typhoon sort of things, but not major damage. Most of the buildings in Mali and Hula Mali are built to withstand certain kinds of storms. But if there was a big, like the 2004 tsunami that hit South Asia, something like that would be,
We'd
but
take
it's a
them
problem.
out.
Yeah, it'd be a problem
We would take
everywhere.
them out.
But with coral dying all over the world, does that affect the islands?
So, and I'm not an expert on coral. I was reading up on it because I was afraid someone like you would ask the question. But it turns out that coral actually grows pretty consistently and can even keep up with rising sea level, which I didn't know. And so they are putting out artificial stuff for coral to grow on. So there's a lot of efforts being done to deal with that. There's some coral bleaching, but the recovery time isn't too bad if you sort of keep other activities away from it.
We saw lots of beautiful blooming, growing
Yeah.
coral, but the beach is also covered with lots of coral skeletons,
Yeah.
just
Yes.
Is there a fishing industry?
oh, huge.
So- And so tuna, I mean, their one export is tuna. And the sustainability angle is all tuna is line caught. I mean, within their territorial waters, it's all line caught. And I've never seen so many different kinds of canned tuna in my life. So, but that's probably, so they import everything and the way they pay for that is through their international tourism piece. There's a lot of receipts connected to international tourism.
Do they export tuna?
They do. Yep, that's probably their only sort of physical export of consequence. Question back to Karen.
I have a question kind of to Leroy's point, but for the 2 meters that they built up to eventually house their population, was that based on some kind of calculation of rising sea levels, or, because it doesn't sound very high?
Well, when you think the highest point in the country now is 2 meters, to them it seemed fairly high. And I looked at that too. The projections of where we're going to be in 50 to 100 years are all over the place. And so there were some projections when they first started doing this back in the turn of the century that they were going to be underwater by 2050. Well, that's not the case. And so I think what they will do is they're already probably put 100, 200,000 people on those areas. If they have to build it up higher, they probably will. They've really got this whole reclamation stick down. It's pretty amazing to see. I'm gonna because you have, yeah.
I just wondered, because it's so much sand, is there any agriculture at all? Can you grow vegetable?
So they grow only a couple of things. They grow watermelon
Mhm.
and some papaya
Some mangoes.
and some mangoes, but that's it, because there's no
Soil.
soil.
Well, they're coconut palms, or date
Yeah.
palms.
Yeah, they have coconut.
Coconut palm.
Yeah. But it's a bit of a challenge to, we saw some potted stuff where people were growing vegetables and stuff in some of the housing developments, but no sort of large scale agriculture. And so they really have to import almost all their food.
Yeah, so if that broke down, the ability to import food, then they'd be in big trouble.
Yeah.
Unless they just hydroponic.
How do they deal with the human waste, the poop and the pee?
So some of it is, I mean, you can imagine that is an issue. Some of it, they use incineration for some of it. They have an island where they put some of it.
They have a
but-
garbage island.
Yeah, they have a garbage island, and it's removing. Waste management is an issue, and I've saw, some reports that the typical tourist, no big surprise, generates about 3 to 4 times as much waste, per person as does. So waste management is something they are struggling with. I mean, they do what we've actually done in this country, put it on a barge, take it a ways out.
Dump it.
Yeah.
Do they do composting toilets? Because with all the ponds and all, you'd think that they could make soil then.
Not that I'm aware of. There's not really is strong, you know, notwithstanding the fact that the sea level rise, there's not really a well-ingrained environmental ethic in the country. I mean, for a variety of reasons, but it's just really not there. So you need that for stuff like that to really catch on.
Jerry,
Yeah.
so how much of their economy is ecotourism?
Ecotourism?
Well, tourism.
Probably the most reliable estimate would be about 40% of the GDP is connected to tourism. But then if you look at government revenue, the estimates there are probably closer to 50 to 60% of government revenue is driven by tourism.
I kind of got the impression from what you were saying about, was it World Bank gave them some money?
For the solar.
So
yeah.
are they like, is part of their economy so vulnerable because of its tourism that they might have to depend on subsidies from other groups, authorities, organizations?
They have not had to do that so far, and I think, well, it depends on how robust the tourism industry stays in the future, but they found a model that is working for the time being, if they can deal with some of the problems that they've got.
Well, I was just reading a Wall Street Journal article, I don't know if you saw it, that talked about since they have the new president coming in, that he's kind of started this idea, the Indians are starting to boycott the Maldives.
Yeah.
And then he's courting China, you know, he's visiting China.
So it's sort of interesting that the geopolitical reality in Maldives is the U.S. is not a player. We are not a player. We don't have an embassy there.
We don't have tourists there.
Yeah. So we don't figure. The two key countries are India and China. So the China Friendship Bridge, the previous president was perceived as pro-China.
Right.
And the Chinese came in, they helped fund the bridge, they built the bridge. The new president is not a friend of India.
Right.
And so there was this thing, the Prime Minister of India is Narendra Modi, and they had this picture, it was like about a few weeks ago, of him vacationing on an island that looked a lot like Maldives. Here's President Modi kicking back. While it was an island of India that they're thinking about trying to develop to rival Maldives. So some of the people in Maldives went ballistic and some of the ministers made comments that they later regretted, and they've lost their positions. And the new president has asked all military people connected with India to leave the country. So there's a bit of a brouhaha going on now.
Well, you know, and so that goes back to 40% of their economy being so tied to tourism. If neither India or China visit them as much as they would like, and they have all these fancy resorts and everything, all these people are gonna lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Lots of Eastern Europeans, Italians,
Russians.
Okay.
Russians.
So others too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't want to overstay our time. How much time do we?
Holy shoot.
So we're tired.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, since you aren't Muslim, and the women are wearing the headscarves, it seemed like it was very friendly. Did you ever feel?
So that's the interesting
Persecuted?
thing. There's not a mandate there that a woman needs to wear a hijab or be covered. So there's a continuum, you know, some women would be dressed like you and I are. Some women choose to wear the hijab, just the head covering. Some women wear the whole thing, including the I don't know, the burqa, with just their eyes visible. They would even have the gloves on, so you didn't see any flesh. So as I got to be close to the women in the hotel and felt comfortable asking them questions about their faith and about that, that was one of the questions I asked. And it's their individual decision, it's their choice, they figure it out however they want to do it. They might move back and forth between wearing, during Ramadan, more of them probably wore something, but not always. So,
And
That's pretty liberal.
Well,
for
It was
them.
very liberal.
It is, and they could change during their lifetime, they can do it for a while, and say, no, I don't wanna do it, and then they can opt out, so yeah, it's considered,
That's
it's a
amazing.
fairly liberal.
yeah, it was, and when
Muslim
I
country.
talked to women about their experience being a Muslim woman, without exception, they were all very clear with me that they felt they had an equal position to their partner.
Wow.
They could run a business, they could own a business, they may, they could do what they want, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that was very liberal.
Yes. Amazing.
What's the crime rate in?
I never saw any evidence of anything, I mean, I don't know what the crime rate is, but my guess is it's quite low. I never saw anybody carrying guns. I very rarely saw police. The only time I saw police was over the military escort for the president, if he happened to be going by, but that was about it.
Jerry mentioned earlier that I felt safe going anywhere at any time. I did, and I've traveled a lot with him, spent time in India and Cambodia and other countries where I would never go anywhere by myself. I certainly wouldn't do that after dark. I could go anywhere and I could stop anybody on the street and say, could you help me if I got into a jam? And I know they would help me. I never once felt unsafe.
They mostly spoke English or not?
They did,
Yeah.
because when kids go to school, they start to learn English, so, yeah.
Did he have jails? Did you see a jail?
I'm
Did not
assuming
see
they
one.
do.
Dogs are forbidden in Islam.
Yeah, it's-
So there are no dogs anywhere. I was missing dog flesh. There's lots of cats,
Yeah.
about, but no dogs, except the police department canine unit had 5 dogs.
Well,
But
That's- yeah, the only
otherwise, there
dogs
are
in
no
the
dogs.
country.
why not?
Islam forbids it, because they're unclean.
They're unclean.
They're unclean.
The cats clean themselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's sort of weird, because cats were everywhere, yeah.
Besides that, they bark.
So I'm gonna get, is there anybody that has not asked a question that I? Okay, I've got it. Go ahead.
Does everyone have a job or have the ability to have a job?
It appears that way.
Yeah.
It
I
appears
think
that way.
partly it's sort of interesting, the young people really have a notion of what constitutes a job. And they all want to be, the men want to have white shirts and dress well, and the women comparable. And so that's why, when I said 1 out of every 4 people in the Maldives is a foreign worker, the construction, the clerks in the stores, the people that wait on you in restaurants, the people that clean the rooms, etc., are all foreign workers. And so the Maldivians are sort of queuing more for the managing, retail management, professional things of some sort.
Business
things like that.
owners.
Yeah. That's why I was always asking everybody all the time, where are you from? Because if I could tell for sure they weren't Maldivian. Yes.
I'm just wondering, with all the foreign workers, I mean, if some of them are Indian, they must have been Hindi. Was there tolerance or room or space for other religions at all? Or was it just like, you're here, we're Muslim, and was there?
There is no freedom of religion.
Yeah.
No.
So, you can't practice openly if you have a religion other than Islam. A lot of the foreign workers are Muslims, the Bangladeshis and Indonesians, etc. But yeah, I don't know the particulars of, and that's a good question. For the Hindis, I'm not sure what they do, but there's a lot of Muslims from India, and I think quite a few of the Indian workers were Muslims as well.
So do the foreign workers have rights? Can they become a citizen?
If they are Muslim and they wanted to, they could petition to be a citizen. I don't think most of them want to stay there. Most of them are sending money back to their families. And they also have, while we were there were numerous strikes. They strike, the foreign workers will strike. A lot of them are working for Indian and other construction companies, and If they weren't being paid, then they would strike, and there was a lot of support within the media and in the government for the strike, so, yeah. But one thing I do wanna say this, so, the year before we got there, Maldives is growing at an amazing speed. So their, growth rate last year was like 10 to 12%. And so in economics, there's this rule of 72. You take the growth rate and you divide it into 72, and that tells you how long it takes the economy to double in size. So if you've got a 10% growth rate, that means the economy's double in size every 7 years. So when we think about China that was doing 8 to 10% for decades, that's why China is where they had this amazing growth rate. Well, you see that happening in Maldives. When a place is growing that quickly, there is activity everywhere. All we heard, pounding, hammering, construction everywhere. Every fourth store was a hardware store because they were selling construction materials. So, I mean, the vibrancy is really amazing. The last time I saw something like that was I worked in Vietnam in the 90s, and when they sort of came out and moved to a market economy, it was the same thing, 10% growth rate. It's just popping, just popping.
So what follows that?
That depends on how good they are in terms of macro management, et cetera. Yeah. It could go a lot of different ways.
It can plateau, it can
Yeah,
crash.
well, you can't maintain that growth rate forever.
When I think of island out in the middle of the ocean, or islands that do not have a mountainous interior, I think you're never gonna get any rain. Does it ever rain there?
Oh, sure,
yeah.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
is rain that,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, lots of
The
rain.
rain's not caused by an uplift of the moist air. It's just, I guess, rain is traveling from
Yeah,
somewhere else.
yeah.
Yeah.
Water rain. In fact, I was just talking to Inaz, who I talk to regularly. I mean, they're seeing climate change there too, and their weather patterns are getting more erratic, and they're getting a lot more rain than they used to. And so on Maui, that densely populated island, when it rains, like anytime it rained and I was going to work, I knew I was going to have to be wading through water because the streets would flood. And it just the storm water system just could not handle high amounts of water. So that sort of came with it.
Other than desalination, what other sources are there of fresh water? It sounds like you could do a lot of rain catchment.
They do rain catchment, but imagine how much rain you're gonna catch in that island of Maui. You know, there's a bit of that, but most of the water supply, in terms of drinking water, on islands like that is from desalination plants. They do as much rainwater catchment as they can. That's more on the smaller islands, the inhabited islands, but not so much in the urban areas. Yeah, Karen.
Jerry, just quick questions. Was your student base, were they primarily Maldivian?
Oh,
Was there any
all,
foreign-
completely.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And then, well, can you expand a little bit between illegal and the forbidden part? And how is that enforced, or is it just like they just don't import alcohol?
I think other than on the resorts, the only place you could get a drink, my understanding was at one hotel at the airport. That's the only place. I mean, I'm sure
No black market?
you could find
No.
it. I mean, I'm sure I know there's a black market because I read about it. I'm sure if you wanted to find it, you could, but that's probably not something you'd want to get caught. I mean,
And
it's,
that's not part of their faith path.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's not part of who they are.
So, yeah, it just, and we had people that visited us, and, you know, it's sort of weird to be in a place where there's no alcohol. I mean, I kind of liked it, actually. I mean, it just took something away that probably wasn't a bad thing
Yeah.
to take away.
It's probably the same for recreational drugs, like marijuana and all of that.
Yeah.
Not there,
I mean,
right?
it's probably, if it's there, it's not open.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're, okay, yes, sir.
Just a quick question. I know you mentioned that there were a lot of women teaching at colleges. What about in the government? Are the men still basically since it's a Muslim?
There has not been a female president yet. A good number of the cabinet or ministers are female. In their version of a parliament, I'm gonna say maybe 20 to 30%. A lot of, and so in a lot of professions, doctors, lawyers, women are very heavily represented, and in education, very much so. But you're right, at that top level or two, it still is predominantly male.
It sounds like, you know, as opposed to some of the stricter or
Yeah.
Muslim countries, that the women really do have a lot better
They,
say
they,
in what's going
yeah,
on.
they really do, they're,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Hospitals and, did you say there were hospitals?
Oh, yeah, and so, the healthcare sector is kind of interesting, it's in transition. There are public hospitals, and every inhabited island has a healthcare center, and we did visit one, I mean, very well, established. We lived near a public hospital on Hulamali, and then India is one of the countries that has invested in hospitals. Many of the doctors are still foreign doctors. Indians are well represented, but they've got teaching hospitals now, and they're trying to ramp up as quickly as they can to have more and more Maldivians move into those positions. It takes a while, and it's just like the university I was at. You don't just immediately go from offering bachelor's degrees to turning out PhDs. It takes a while, but the government, to their credit, has been very supportive of people getting education outside the country to bring back the skill set to teach in the universities, the hospitals, et cetera. So all of my colleagues had been educated outside the country, and in almost every case supported by the government. You know, New Zealand, Australia, UK,
Malaysia.
yeah.
Is there a mental health portion of that?
Did you get much of a feel for the, I don't know.
I didn't get much of a
Yeah,
feel for that.
we didn't have any interaction with that, so I can't answer that. Yeah. It's a good question, but I don't know.
I'm curious though, is it more like allopathic? Is it like a disease centered like it is here, the healthcare? Or
There's a combination.
more lifestyle?
There's a combination. So I went to one health center on an island that we visited because I had a reaction to limes, if you can believe it. I had hives from drinking lime juice. But then my hotel family took me to a private hospital when I was struggling with the food poisoning. And that was state-of-the-art, shiny, you know, beautiful.
Like kind of more Western
Right,
medicine?
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And pharmaceuticals, I wonder if the pharmaceutical industry has as much, power there that they do here?
I didn't get that impression at all.
But there's pharmacies
No,
everywhere.
but there's pharmacies everywhere, and usually the pharmacist is from India.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Did people smoke?
Yes,
Yeah,
people
yeah,
smoke.
yeah, they do.
People do smoke, and they drink copious amounts of coffee. There is a coffee shop every 6 steps, and as one of Jerry's friends joked, well, we don't drink alcohol, so we have to be addicted to something. It's the coffee. It's the coffee.
Yeah, and great coffee shops. I love coffee, so I was in heaven, you know, I'm going, okay. All right, I think this is a
Thank
good
you,
time now.
everybody.
Thank you so much, appreciate it.